All right, here we go, everyone. Welcome to the YouTube live stream for the day. We have a bunch of questions here, a lot by the same person, so we will get through all this. Today is obviously Friday. We had it's spring break here in London. We had our training on Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday to give the kids a long weekend to finish off spring break. Obviously, because of spring break, the numbers were down, but yesterday we did our typical pre-practice training warm-up, and then we did farmer's walk, and we did the prowler. So it was kind of a all strongman style workout. The kids had a good time, and the best part was the kids got to choose the weights, and they got to do kind of whatever they wanted. So it was nice as I was watching them, it was nice to see the kids figure out what to do, so to speak. They didn't need to be spoon-fed everything, and it became incredibly competitive. And so it was just really nice to see. I think one of the big things I try to do is, obviously I want to help the kids win football games. I want them to be strong, physically strong and mentally strong young men. I want them to be super independent. This is all part of the big plan, so to speak. But if the kids do have a love of training, that they would continue on, it would be nice for them to grasp, to kind of get all these different concepts that I think are super important, besides the basic principles that I always talk about, but to learn how to train without being spoon-fed everything. I think that's super important. I think that's, as a veteran of this job, so to speak, I believe that one of the big things people are missing out on, and this is, I'm part of the problem, is they've been spoon-fed how to train for their whole life. And they need to learn how to train for themselves a little bit, how to make some decisions for themselves. And this is really readily apparent during assistance work, where if they don't have everything planned out in every set and rep, they don't know what to do. When for example, when I was in high school all the way up until today, when assistant work comes around, I just have fun, and you just think of different challenges and just let it rip. So anyway, let's get started here. All right. Tim Snow writes, "Hello, Jim. I like to do main barbell lifts all day." I don't know what that means. "My program is 4 times a week, the 4 main lifts. Each day, one lift is 5-3-1, and the others are submaximal. I only had chins in bike or walk. Is this bad?" Well, Tim, I'm going to be completely... I like to do main barbell lifts all day. Tim, I'll be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure. Well, this is not a good start, huh? I'm not exactly sure what you're doing. I guess I'm thinking maybe you do all 4 lifts on one day, 4 times a week. I'm going to guess that's what it is. And then he only does biking, walking, or does chin-ups as the assistants. Is this bad? I wouldn't recommend it. It's not bad if it's done for, a short period of time, but I would not use that as a non-negotiable style template or a anchor template, like the one that you come back to when you don't know what to do or if you're off the path. So nothing, you seem to have success, as always, whatever you're doing, if you're having success, let it ride, because having success in training is awesome. And sometimes it's short-lived, and you have to take advantage of all the good days that you have and the good training blocks that you have. But that's not something I would probably recommend, for a long-term approach. But if you want to give it a shot, let it go. All right, we got like a million posts here from Caribbean Dreamer 163. So I'm going to try to work through these as quickly as possible, because there's not really a question in here until the end. So I will get to the question. It has to do with weight vest training, walrus, body weight stuff. His question is, how can I fund your work or donate to support you writing a complete new and comprehensive book just about walrus training? With different style templates, but suited for brand new beginners all the way up to advanced and for all circumstances. Someone has, for example, for busy dads, older guys, tight schedules for training, basically for everyone. Well, I don't have like a support program or, something you can donate to. So, as much as I appreciate people wanting to send me money, it would be disingenuous and totally immoral for me to take that money, because right now I can't, I just don't have the time. And if I'm going to be completely honest, if I'm going to write a walrus book or that kind of book, I can't do everything from absolute total beginners to, every circumstance. It's not feasible. And so that's one of the reasons why I always like to put principles in action, because I try to teach you the principles and then you have to adapt them, because I can't account for everyone, especially brand new beginners. A lot of times with brand new beginners, bodyweight training, certain bodyweight movements are not applicable to them. The push-up, for example, if you can't do a push-up, you can't, you have to find something else. And incline push-ups only work, I'm sorry guys, they only work so long. Like you need to add in some barbell work, like obviously bench press or dumbbells and stuff, and go from there and strengthen the body. The same can be said obviously for pull-ups and chin-ups. So I'd like to write a book sometime on the walrus stuff. As for now, there's a ton of stuff on the forum. There's a sticky post at the top of the strength section of the forum. And not only is it my input, but people talking about what they've done and answering some questions and stuff. So again, one day I hope to get to it, but the other thing is this is kind of saying no to your question, is I can't account for every single thing because it's impossible. And, one of the things, one of the questions I get asked a lot as a coach is, what do you do if you have a player who's not motivated, or doesn't want to train, or just not giving the effort? What do you do? And the answer is, there's nothing you can really do. And what I mean by that is, there is a contract between me and the athlete, and we both have to fulfill those contracts. And one of the things that the athlete has to do is come in with a good attitude and give effort. I'm not asking to be Johnny Navy SEAL, because obviously I'm not Johnny Navy SEAL instructor, awesome guy who knows everything. But the problem is I can't, there's no answer for that, because I can't spend all my time trying to motivate and, rev someone up when you've got 49, 59, 60 other kids who are giving all that effort, because you're taking away all that time and effort, and all that energy. It'll sap you out. So the point being is, I can't account for everything. And but I always, I don't know, that we've had kids occasionally that don't want to give effort and don't have a good attitude and stuff like that. And generally speaking, either the kids get on board, they get more mature, and they realize that, having a great attitude and having great effort leads to them to having success both on the field and off the field. But a lot of times the kids just quit, and it stinks, but that's part of growing up. We had one of my favorite all-time players, and one of the best guys we've ever had, was a massive accolades after his senior year. As a freshman, he had one of the worst attitudes I've ever seen, and the effort was poor, and he actually either got booted off or quit. He played most of his freshman year on the JV squad, but he ended up quitting, didn't play his sophomore year. And then he ended up coming back, I believe, his junior or senior year. Now, obviously, he had grown up both emotionally and physically, but holy cow, when he came back and started training, kept his mouth shut, was one of the hardest working dudes. In fact, it took me a couple months to realize who this person was, because this was when I first met him. It was my first year, and I didn't really have much interaction with him at all. And when Kyle, the head coach, said, "Oh yeah, that's so-and-so," I was blown away. It was night and day. And so sometimes it takes some of these young kids a little bit of time to kind of get on board. And but holy cow, did things change. He went from being one of the biggest pains in the asses to be one of the greatest athletes we've ever had and one of the best dudes I've known. I just saw him recently, and he is doing great post high school. I mean, doing amazing. And it's awesome to see stuff like that. Okay. What's up, big? There's my son right there. All right. So here we go. Hey, Jim, I was recently asked to help out with strength and conditioning at my old high school for football and wrestling teams. I've been doing 5-3-1 for a long time. Is it okay to use your program? Yes, of course. He writes, I feel if I don't ask, I feel like I'm stealing. Of course not, dude. That's train, get these kids good, and do a great job. And I don't care which program you use. And if you use mine, that's awesome. Then he goes on and writes, does the same guy. Also, have you ever thought of working with the Squat University channel for your back? I know he's worked with Matt Wenning and Julius Maddox. It might be something to look into. Okay, well, I will look into it. I'm not familiar with Squat University, but I will look at their thing. So, all right, here we go. Phil Dittmer. God, that sounds like, man, like one of the guys who played in Machine Head or something. I don't know what his name was. Anyway, says, good morning, Jim. Boyd Epley said in a presentation that athletes need to train for muscle and explosiveness, but not in the same workout. What are your thoughts on that statement? Thank you. So I know exactly what you're talking about, Phil, and I've seen the 4-day style of training that Nebraska did. 2 of those days would be the metabolic training that they become very popular was, and then the days after, they would do their hang cleans and stuff like that. Okay. So the most important thing in this question is to understand that the athletes that Boyd Epley gets and the athletes that I have are completely different. I have to build the athletes from the ground up. And that is a much different thing than having 4- and 5-star recruits, kids who are physically gifted, and working with them. It's a completely different animal. And I believe in a concurrent style of training. Again, that doesn't mean you have to do everything all the time in one workout, but there's no reason why our kids can't do some explosive, whether it be box jumps or some kind of plyometric jumps in the workout, and also train for hypertrophy. So, yeah, you guys have to understand that there's a huge difference between training populations. And just because they play the same sport doesn't mean they do the same workout. It doesn't work like that, guys. Okay. John Taylor writes, hey, Jim, hope you and the family are doing well. Hope to see you again someday. Well, thank you, John. I appreciate it. Okay, let's see what we got here. All right, here we go. Please, guys, if you have a question, please ask in the chat. This live stream is only as good as the questions that we have here. Okay, Jeff Mullis says, hell yeah, let's go, Jim. What are some ways you've learned not to overthink your training? Your programs help keep things simple, and I enjoy training for just the sake of training. Well, the one thing I think is important, and just like everyone else, you start with what you believe is a nice, easy style of training, and then you read too much or you think too much, and it starts going and varying. So I think the number one thing, well, there's a couple things here. One is always have a base training template or program, or however you want to say, that you can come back to when you realize that you've come off course. Okay, so that's number one, is have a base training program. Number two is always try to take a 4-year plan in my head as far as how to program and how to train, meaning, like I'll use like an Olympic style template. So instead of trying to lose X amount of pounds in 30 days, or try to get my bench to 300 in 1 week, whatever the thing is. I look at it a long-term approach. And when you take a long-term approach, your training becomes much more balanced and it's much more patient. And what ends up happening is you end up making progress quicker over the long run, progress quicker because you're not driving yourself into the ground. So I think those two things have really helped me. And the other thing too is, I keep a training book. And I think when you look back on some of those things and flip to the pages, you can see some of your old workouts and you're like, oh man, I remember when I was doing this and that, and look at all, I was feeling great. I see my notes here, the reps were explosive or whatever. You make little notes in your training program or your training log, and you realize that that you don't need to be doing everything that you think. So I am especially when I was younger, I got caught up in the gears of there's nothing wrong with thinking and progressing in your training. However, I think a lot of times people do way too much or try to do a million things in the workout. So take the long-term 4-year approach, have a base workout. And the other thing that I do, especially when I'm coaching my athletes, is I always have someone, Matt Rhodes, who I usually call Rhodes once a week or once every 2 weeks, and we talk to each other. And most of the time, one of us just talks and then has their own answer. So it's really about talking through things while the other one asks questions and gets you to think. So having someone to bounce ideas off of that kind of kick you back on track. Now, the one thing you have to understand that's, just I got accused of not simplifying things the other day, which is the first time that's ever happened to me. But simple just doesn't mean doing the main lifts and leaving, and simple doesn't mean not smart, so to speak. Or maybe people think of simple stuff as dumb. So there's still a lot of thought that goes into a lot of this stuff. But I think the big thing is realizing you don't need to do everything all the time, all at once. And I think that's the number one thing. So for example, if you really want to get in better conditioning shape, you don't need to do a million conditioning, running 10 miles a day and stuff like that. You could separate all that into little chunks and take that long-term approach. Okay. John Donovan, in reaction to the question about the Walrus book and support, he says, if you want to join support Jim, join his forum. And John he always shows up to these. He's also on the forum. So thank you, John. I appreciate that. John Donovan also writes, hey, Jim, thanks for talking about Iron Monkey on the forum. They are now in my playlist rotation while lifting. For those of you that don't know, Iron Monkey was a band from the UK. They released really 2 albums. They're self-titled, and the album called Our Problem. And then unfortunately the singer passed away. And they had a couple splits and EPs in there. But to me, that's one of the best bands in the world. And the singer, Johnny Morrow, the man who had passed away, is one of the most insane, craziest vocalists I've ever heard in my life. And the lyrics are bananas. Now, they tried to Iron Monkey, some of the guys in Iron Monkey reformed, 5 or 6 years ago. It's not the same band. And the music is kind of the same kind of genre and stuff. But they had something special, did Iron Monkey. So if you're into that extreme, sludgy, hardcore with extreme vocals, Johnny Moore, I don't know how the hell that guy talked or how his voice box ever survived. So, all right, here we go. Jesse Driscoll says, hey, Jim, have you ever heard of John McCallum? He has an awesome template for power: squat, bench, row, high pulls, deads, sets of 3, adding weight until you get to singles. 3 days a week. What are your thoughts? That's a lot of work and a lot of incredibly heavy work. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 multi-joint massively, you could load those exercises. So, I mean, I know who John McCallum is. I don't know if I would recommend that style of training for a long time. I mean, some people might get a lot out of it. But I also think not adding in assistance work and adding in some kind of hypertrophy and some balance in your training, I think that will do a detriment. But obviously it worked for him and has worked for other people. It just, in my experience and all the people I've worked with, I think there needs to be a little more variety. And I think you need to also be a little smarter about how you load the main lifts. The more that I work with a younger population and the older I get, and the more that I correspond with people who, coaches who are also training the style population as well as older lifters. A lot of the stuff that I personally realized and kind of thought about gets kind of cemented, which I guess is probably me looking at confirmation bias a little bit. But there is something to being smart about loading the barbell lifts, not driving yourself in the ground with the main lifts, and working for a long-term approach. And so I always say, like, we power the barbell. So we want awesome, perfect, fast, explosive reps on the main lifts. And we want to kind of bodybuild the assistants, so to speak. So, but again, I personally wouldn't do that. I think it might be good for a younger guy, but even then, I wouldn't really, I don't know. A lot of the things look really good on paper, guys. That's all I'm going to say. But there's also the reality you have to account for. Okay, Juan Zimbato says, hey, I've started jumping rope as part of my conditioning. What's your thoughts on progressing? I started with 3 rounds of 30 skips. I have worked up to 5 sets of 60 skips. Should I focus on skips or time? I think you should do both, and I'll give you a couple examples. So one of the things, the only issue I have with jumping rope is, this is not just my experience, it's the people I've worked with, is the shin splints for a lot of people become a problem. So when you start jumping rope, make sure your body is ready for it, and make sure you don't progress incredibly fast or do something really stupid right in the beginning. What you're doing is fine, but I think it's also important to have something like set the timer for 20 minutes and see how many, or 10 minutes, or whatever arbitrary time, whatever you feel, and try to get as many skips as possible in that time period. That would be one way to do it. Another would be, instead of adding more skips to each round or set, to increase the rounds and just do that, and then so you can alternate. But I don't think you should just settle on one way of increasing your training, if that makes sense. Just like sometimes you can use heavier weight and do the same reps with the same weight, or with a heavier weight, or you can also do more reps with the same weight. There's always ways of doing it. So don't limit yourself. Okay, here we go. Jesse asks, also tactical barbell. K Black, nobody knows his true identity since he's still in the special forces. But the conspiracy theory is K Black is really Jim Wendler. Have you heard of tactical barbell training? I've heard the name thrown around. I'm not very familiar with that stuff. I'll be honest, because the people I coach aren't special forces. So I haven't really looked too much into that. But no, I am not K Black. And but I'm also, for him to maintain his anonymity in the age of the internet is pretty impressive. So good for him. And I hope if he is truly part of that, man, I hope he's doing great work, and I hope he's helping the guys around him. And like I said, I'm not familiar with it, but I hope it's awesome. Any time we get the physical culture raised up, whatever that may be in this country or across the world, the better off we're going to be, guys. All right. Gregor says, hello, greetings again from Poland. Well, hello. This time live. I have a question about your routine when it comes to mobility. What exercises do you do, and how often? So what I would generally recommend, just to start with, is do something like the Agile 8. and then start working from there, and looking at different mobility routines. I don't think you should just do one mobility routine over and over again. I think you should have some options. For example, so I would do the Agile 8, or I would do something like the Parisi warm-up, not the whole thing, okay, but do sections of the Parisi warm-up, which I think people would get a ton out of. I've also done things such as, what did I do? Do hurdle duck unders. I have a hurdle in my garage, and then adjusting that and doing hurdle stuff, hurdle overs. So that's two things. Then I would sit into a deep squat with a 30-pound kettlebell and just sink down. And then the other thing I would do in that series of things is I would do the mace swings for my shoulder. So I always try to do something a little bit for my upper body or some kind of movement. Like I did Turkish get-ups, which that was for my shoulder. That really helped my shoulder. Another thing I did for my shoulders besides the mace swings and the Turkish get-ups was doing the bottoms-up kettlebell press. So what I would recommend you do, there's a million exercises you can do for mobility, but start with the Agile 8 and look at the Parisi warm-up and start picking out stuff. It doesn't have to be a very long mobility warm-up, but most of my stuff centers on my hips. That seems to be very tight on me. But whatever problem area you have, if you do have a problem, then attack it. But as long as you're kind of doing something for your upper body and something a little bit for your upper body and just a variety of movements, I think you'll be good to go. And how often? You obviously like to do it at least once a day for most people. If you have an issue with flexibility and mobility, I think you should do it 2 to 3 times a day. And again, it doesn't have to be very long. 10 minutes, 3 times a day can make a huge change. Anyway, even with the kids that I work with, we have a variety of mobility and flexibility routines, and I just kind of change them up when I feel like things are getting dull. So look into those 2 things. I think you'll be very, for the time being, you'll be very challenged and you will be feeling good. Okay. D Hart says, hey, Jim, understanding that challenges are exactly that, challenges. Any thoughts on turning the beach body challenge into just a standard training cycle? Just lower the training max to 80 to 85% and see. Yeah, you can do that. I'd probably lower the training max a little bit more personally, especially on the squat and the deadlift. You could keep the bench around 80%, but I'd probably lower the squat and the deadlift. So yeah, you can give that a rip. That's not a insane challenge, so to speak. Oh, there's one of my cats right there. What's up, Bobo? I'm going to probably have to let him out a little bit. Nope. Okay. So yes, I think you'd be okay, especially with that challenge. But some of the challenges, I don't think that's very appropriate. Mr. M. He says, hello, Jim. My 5+ and 3+ sets on squat and bench are getting pretty hard. Should I run the next cycle at the same training max, lower the training max, or just go and push it? I would lower the training max right now, and whatever you can get for 5 reps. Good, strong 5 reps, not a last rep where you're just doing like this, but I would probably keep that number. So as your training max. So if you can bench press 200 pounds for 5 fast, good reps and you feel good, it doesn't have to be that. I would probably set that as your training max, guys. Generally speaking, the lower that you go within reason on the training max, the better off you're going to be. Okay. Remember that you got to let the training do the work. The training doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be testing that day. You have to let the training build up, stack great days, stack some good days, and good days, and then a couple bad days. But don't get caught up in the training max, guys. That's one of the best things about being a coach is I determine what weights the kids do, because if I don't do that, the weights go way too heavy, the form gets crappy, the kids get run down. So the more, if you can take your ego out of it, I think you'd be good to go. For the last, I'd say maybe 3 months, our kids have kept the same training max on most of the lifts, and we kind of did a rep test last week, 2 weeks ago on the trap bar. We had the kids work up, and I based all their workup sets based on their bar speed and stuff like that. So I just watched the kids, and we had a number of kids just ripping massive PRs. Kid whose best deadlift might have been 300 for 5 to 315 for 12, stuff like that. And and they all have a very, very, very low training max. What's up, buddy? So just understand, don't let your ego get a hold of you guys, and you will be good. So lower the training max. Make sure every rep is dead awesome, balls solid, fast, explosive. Your technique is good. Let the assistance work drive some hypertrophy, and you'll be much better off in the short run and the long run. Chad Jones says, good stuff, Jim. When are those You Do Neck shirts coming out? Yeah. I don't have a very big neck anymore, but I don't know. I wish what a great story. I'll tell that story sometime, the You Do Neck story. It was a cool time in my life because I was spending the week with my oldest son in Texas. I was my ex-wife and her parents were away on a long vacation, so I lived in my ex-in-law's house taking care of my kid, and that was a week I spent, or a little more than a week, in Texas. And I would drop my kid off every day, and then I would go train. I'd drop my kid off at school, obviously, and then go train. And I had a crazy You Do Neck experience. All right. Okay, here we go. Last questions. What exercises would you recommend for an average Joe like me? This is mobility. Again, Gregor, this is go look at the Agile 8, and those exercises what I would recommend. There's probably, I think, 8 movements, right? Agile 8. Do those movements and you will be good to go. So those are the movements I would recommend, especially if you don't have a lot of experience and it's completely laid out, and go from there. Okay. Those are the movements I would recommend. Okay. Hey, Tim Snows says, hey, Jim, just out of curiosity, since you have lots of tattoos, how do you proceed in regards to training and rest after doing a tattoo? I also have lots of tattoos, and I'm always taking time off to not ruin the artwork. About a week after to heal. I guess it depends on obviously where the tattoo is. Some tattoos you can train around them a little bit, and sometimes you can't. Like the neck tattoos were a little tough to get around because when you're straining, it feels like things are kind of explode on you, so to speak, when they're healing. So I didn't really take time off. I just worked around everything. So for example, if, when I had my hands done, I didn't do any upper body work because I didn't really want to grab a barbell. So I dragged the sled and, did stuff like that. I just kept anything out of my hands basically. So I didn't really go bananas with the rest stuff and go crazy. I just always put Aquaphor on them, on the tattoos all the time. I kept them. I thought that accelerated the healing quite a bit. In fact, Aquaphor and Neosporin, my wife made a big jug of this stuff when I had massive road rash from a motorcycle accident, and she would apply that, once or twice a day and wrap me in saran wrap. So, yeah, Tim, I think, especially when I got all those tattoos, I was at a time in my life where training was a giant, and still is a giant priority, but back then it was a huge priority. So to take time off would have driven me nuts, and maybe that's not the smartest thing to do, but I always worked around stuff. So that's the best advice I'll give you. Think of having a tattoo as kind of having an injury. You don't just not do anything. You do what you can do and just do the hell out of it. So, all right. The Acid Samurai. Boy, wouldn't want to see a guy tripping on acid with a giant sword in his hand. Says, hey, Jim, I've been bumping into overuse injuries, especially when training for the bench press, which gets very annoying and discouraging in the long run. What would you advise? He has a pec and front delts have been sore for months. Well, the one thing I would do was you got to let the body or the injury rest, especially if it's a joint injury, especially with whatever movements you've been doing. I mean, you can kind of work around it a little bit here and there. But I would let the joint injury, it doesn't mean you just don't train, just train around it, let that heal. And then what I would do was this is when I was benching very heavy because I had bad shoulders and stuff, was on the third week. I would do all my bench and press, but I wouldn't do a lot of assistance work at all that was pushing. So it would all be pulling. So every 2 weeks, I do my dips and my dumbbell bench and all that other stuff. And then the third week, I wouldn't do any. I would just do the main lift and a lot of upper back and lat work. You also have to understand that I don't know what you mean by what your overuse is, like how often you are training and the frequency and stuff like that. But what I've noticed too, as I've gotten older and I got a little wiser, and realized this like when I was younger, but I didn't always abide by it, is I think people get wrapped up that they need to do a lot when I think they need to do a little bit less, but do it better. Make sure your reps are stronger. Make sure that the exercises are performed flawlessly, explosively, controlled, all that good stuff. The other thing too is, especially with the bench press, I would have a slight pause at the bottom of each rep. Keep everything tight. It doesn't have to be a 4-second pause or anything, but that touch and go, I think, really wreaks havoc on your shoulders and your pecs. Staying tight and holding at the bottom 1/1000 punch, even on your warm-up sets and stuff like that, that really helped my pecs and my shoulders. Yes, your weight might come down a little bit in the exercise, but it's not going to be drastic. You're not going to go from benching 500 to benching 135 for 2. And obviously, if you can get your hands on like a football bar, with a neutral grip or, slightly tilted in, tilted out, whatever you want to do, I think that can do things. But the number one thing is just do less, but do what you do and do it better. Let your body heal, okay? And you may have to change. Instead of benching twice a week, maybe bench once every 10 days and see if you can get that to work. Once you get to a certain point strength-wise, a lot of times the answer is not to do more. You got to let your body recover. And I know that goes, everyone wants to train 65 times a day. But for the strength training, sometimes less is more, and you got to let your body recover. Especially when you start getting your intramuscular coordination gets very high, you got to be careful about that. And remember, guys, just because your favorite lifter trains 5 days a week and does all this crazy stuff doesn't mean you can. Some people are just built differently, and that's the way it goes. And so while it's important to base some of your training off guys that are super strong and all that other good stuff, you also have to remember that you have your own body and you're your own person. And if you're honest with yourself about that, in the long run, you're going to be better off realizing that your body is your body, and it's not, a guy who squats 900 for 5 at 220. So anyway, here we go. And boom goes the dynamite writes, I had my hip replaced on December 29th and started doing 5-through-1 again 7 weeks later. I'm up to 315 on the box and I feel alive again. That's awesome. I'm just writing to this to say thank you. Well, that's great. Both Dave Tate and my good friend Matt Rhodes had hip replacement surgery. And both of them have sworn by the box squat. And obviously you can monitor the depth of your hip with the box squat. And I think that's a great thing. And that's super cool. 7 weeks later, you're already kicking butt. Just be careful, ease into everything. And you'll be fine, okay? And just understand that you can still kick a ton of ass, but you're going to have to be a little smart about kicking the ass. All right? Be more precise in your cuts. Don't just stab all the time. There we go. He goes on, and boom goes the dynamite. Okay, never mind. I won't. That's fine. Okay. All right, Matt Nealon. What's going on, Matt? I have known Matt for a long, long time. Says, hey, Jim, it's Matt Nealon. Thank you for doing these. They're awesome. I'm considering 3 days a week with one lower day, squats and deads with a low training max, 75% maybe. Thoughts on this while chasing numbers? Also, I never make these live, but I watch them after. That's awesome. Thank you, Matt. You seem very happy and grateful. It's awesome to see you. Wishing you and your family the best. I am massively grateful for everything that I had in my life. Like everyone else, you wish you kind of sometimes would have done this different or that different. But if I'm going to be honest with myself, I'm very, very lucky to have the life that I have. It's not perfect. I'm not a millionaire. I still have issues like everyone else, but there's not a single day that I don't drive up to my driveway. I guess it's this way. Yeah, my driveway's right there. Every time I drive up, if I go to the grocery store, come back from training the kids or whatever I'm doing, every time I drive up on my driveway, I'm super thankful that I have a home to come home to. It's never lost on me. I was telling one of the kids the other day, he kind of tore his hands during doing the farmer's walk. And I said, I got in a motorcycle accident in 2010 and I had massive, horrible road rash on my back. It was gross. Anyway, as you can imagine, showering with that road rash was horrible. And I still, every time I get in the shower, I turn my back to the water. And I'm like, thank God it doesn't burn, because it was just etched in my memory. And so I'm super thankful for all that little stuff. So I think that's super important, because I think it's easy to get negative about some stuff. And I think there's plenty of stuff to be negative about, but I'm also grateful that I have heat. I'm grateful that I have air conditioning. I'm grateful that my wife and my kids are healthy. Anyway. All right, here we go. So asking his question, I'm considering doing 3 days a week. One of those days is squats and deads with a low training max, 75%. So this is what I would say is you can start with that 75% training max, but I'd also say, Matt, that I'm sure you know this, that each of those lifts are going to be a little bit different in regards to the training max. As an example, most of the time, we train the deadlift a little lighter training max percentage-wise than the squat. That might be different for you, but let's just say that. So you can start there. The other thing is you might be able to alternate every week. So 1 week, your squat would be your main lift, and then you'd follow up with a little lower volume deadlifts, and the next week you might switch. Okay, that's one option. But you might realize that if you squat first and deadlift second, that always seems to work better for you, and that's fine. But understand that second lift will probably be a little compromised during the training session. Doesn't mean it's going to be compromised in the long run, because that might be exactly what you need to do for that. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. As an example, maybe on one of the day, like on week 1, you do squats, you work up to a PR set or whatever you want to do. And then for your deadlifts, you might do 5 sets of 3 at your second set. And then the next week, you do something very similar with the deadlift. You work up to a PR set, and then you drop down and maybe do an appropriate squat workout. That might be the 5 sets of 3 at second set last. It might be 5 sets of 5. Or 8 sets, 10 sets of 5, maybe every minute on the squat at your first set, something like that. So you can get very creative with that stuff. But the other thing I would do is I'd probably do something where you train in that style for 6 weeks. And then the next week on separate days, you test your training max and see how you've improved in those things. And you can go from there, or you can work up and do jokers, but have some kind of system in there where you can kind of test what's going on if you don't feel like you're getting the necessary feedback during the training day. So, all right, here we go. Dan B says, hey, Jim, what are your thoughts on using the lift variations or specialty bars for back down volume sets, getting older and have aching joints, i.e. the safety squat bar, Hatfield squats after regular squats for first set last? Dan, I think that's an awesome variation. I think more people should be able to do that, especially older lifters, or if you just want some variety in your training. The other thing is if you are getting achy joints and stuff like that with whatever you're doing, you may have to veer off the path a little bit. As an example, you may have to use the safety squat bar for all your sets, or you may have to do a box squat. So don't be afraid to switch up your main work when your body's telling you one thing. All right, that's super important for older lifters, because the more you kind of grind yourself down. Instead of being able to do a variation, you won't be able to do any kind of squatting. So if you have to change, guys, if you have to use a different bar, if you have to use a different set rep thing, if you have to change your approach to how you do each lift, if you have to do much lower volume or higher intensity or some kind of variation in there, if you have to change how many days a week you do a certain lift, man, just do what you need to do, guys. Don't keep on trying to pound a square peg in a round hole, because you will pay dearly for that. So embrace the change, guys. It's okay. And as long as you're doing some kind of lift that resembles a squat or resembles a deadlift or does some kind of pressing movement, you're going to be okay. Thinking that you could only use a straight barbell and never use a box, or have to do the bench press instead of doing the incline press or something like that, that's is very limited in how your training is going to be, and it's going to eventually ruin you. So be open to change. And as an example, I get this question all the time. I'm sure you guys have heard this, is, hey, I love to switch to the trap bar instead of the regular deadlift. And they have all these mental blocks about doing so. And unfortunately, guys, you have to think at the bottom line, you're just picking up something that's heavy off the ground. And if that means it's a trap bar, if it means it's a snatch grip deadlift or whatever else variation you can think of, the most important thing is you're picking up something heavy off the ground. And if that means you have to use a trap bar, if that means you have to use the high handles on the trap bar, or whatever that is, it's okay. Right? Especially if you're not competing, it doesn't matter. All right, so Henry Barden says, hey, I love these, Jim. Keep them going. Well, I plan to. Henry is hitting the 400-meter repeats and feeling very athletic. Thanks for your forever running template. It works wonders. Well, that's awesome, Henry. The 400-meter race in track is what I call the worst race in the world. If anyone has run the 400-meter and ran it appropriately, it is a long sprint that is, I don't care how good a shape you're in, it feels like death at the end. And when I was in junior high and high school, I'd always run the 400. I'd always throw the discus, and then I'd always have to run the very last race of every meet, which was the 4x4. And let me tell you how much fun that was. So anyway, that's awesome. I'm glad you're loving the 400 meters, man, and enjoy. All right, here we go. Matt Nealon says, I like the idea of alternating the focus and the 7-week test on separate days. Makes perfect sense. Thank you, brother. The other thing, Matt, is don't be so quick to raise your training max. If, for example, let's say you're using a 300-pound training max for your deadlift. If what you're doing is working and you go test and you get super strong, stay with the same training max. All right? I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I think you need to own your training max before you add on, and you don't have to always raise your training max. In fact, we do at least 2 cycles at the same training max, and sometimes if the kid is not where I want him to be, if his reps aren't the way perfect, then I won't raise his training max. I just ask him to do his sets better. So don't be so quick into raising the training max. That's one of the big things I've learned the last couple of years is we repeat a lot. And magically, even though they're doing the same weights every single cycle, the kids get much better. Because not just because they're hitting rep maxes or anything like that. It's because they're training consistently and they're using their sets are getting better at the same weights. That's super important. And they're letting the assistants do the work. So let the work do the work. Don't be always about raising the weight. All right. All right. I can't pronounce this name, but it's Coco Loco, maybe? I don't know. What should be bodyweight exercises goals for adults in your opinion? Example, 10 chin-ups, 20 push-ups, 50 squats, etc. I'm not exactly sure. Are you talking about like a single set or as part of your, I don't know what you're asking, if it's just one all-out set. Listen, when you're in if you're an adult, I've said this a couple times on these live streams. Listen, it's great to be able to do 20 pull-ups or 100 push-ups or whatever. All right, but what the most important thing, if you're an adult and maybe you're not very experienced in training, if you go from no pull-ups to 2 pull-ups in 3 months, that's awesome. That's as impressive as anything. All right, so I don't want the people that can only do 1 pull-up and struggle and work like hell to get 3 pull-ups in. I don't want to make them feel like what they're doing isn't awesome because they can't do 20 pull-ups. And a lot of this stuff, guys, is going to be based on your past training experience. For example, if someone in my spot who's been training their whole life, doing 10 chin-ups is not a big deal. So a lot of these goals aren't going to be very appropriate for me. Okay, so I would probably say wherever you are right now, get 1 more. That's the best thing I can try to tell you, is just try to do a little bit better, or try to do what you're doing and do it the same reps and do them cleaner, do them stronger. So, but I don't really have, and I don't like doing just the 1 rep, 1 set to failure as a test. I think there's better ways of doing stuff like that. So, for example, doing 10 minutes of as many push-ups as you can, or doing a circuit and doing a total amount of reps and seeing what that time circuit is. So, all right. Derek Legan says, hey, Jim, thank you for all that you do. These videos are phenomenal. Dr. Ken, it's Dr. Ken Leischner, definitely passed the torch to you, and you are appreciated in the strength community more than you know. Well, Derek, thank you very much. I've talked about Dr. Ken a lot, both on podcasts and on here. And for those that don't know, Dr. Ken Leischner was a pioneer in the strength world. Most of his time was spent, I think probably all of his time was spent in Long Island, I think, in New York. He owned a legendary gym back in those days, and also trained people out of his amazingly outfitted garage gym that was phenomenal. And he's written a number of books and had like a newsletter. I've got to talk to Dr. Ken on multiple times. I never met him in person. Unfortunately, Dr. Ken passed away a couple of years ago, which is horrible. But Dr. Ken, whatever you thought about his training, some people didn't agree with what he said because he was very opinionated, and he had every right to be because he had great success. You can never question his passion for the sport. You can never question his willingness to help others and his commitment to making things better in the strength world. So anyway, okay. Barbara says, hey, what exercises are gym proven exercises for walrus workouts for each category? Push, pull, legs, and abs, and only 1 exercise per regular workout, or several from each category? Well, basically for your lower body, obviously a squat, any single leg movement is approved. Obviously any kind of sled, prowler, sled drag, stuff like that. We also use you can use any kind of kettlebell movement, swings, snatches, cleans, dumbbell squats, stuff like that. And we also use abdominal movements as a leg movement, so to speak. That would obviously include any kind of leg raise, the ab wheel, stuff like that. For the pulling, you obviously have fat man rows, rack chins, pull-ups, chin-ups, rope work, climbing rope, monkey bars, the pegs and rows would all work in there, some kind of dumbbell row or kettlebell row. And the push stuff is, you have a variety of different push-ups, whether it be on handles or your hands flat on the ground. What's the other one there? Chain suspended. You can always obviously do dips, any kind of dip. And you can also do some kind of dumbbell overhead press. So all those exercises, you can really be as creative as you want. And I think it's super awesome because you can have a million different workouts and you can adjust to see how you feel on that day. A lot of times I will alternate the exercises. So for one set, I'll do pull-ups as my pull option. For one set, I might do kettlebell rows or dumbbell row and just alternate those during the workout. So sometimes I'll pick 5 different lower body movements and just cycle them through. So the first set might be squat, the second one might be lunge, the third one might be the prowler, the fourth one might be like a back raise, and the fifth one might be kettlebell swings. And so you just kind of alternate like that. You have as much fun as you want. So there you go. Okay. So the Coco Loco, he asked about adult standards in a single set. All right. So I don't know. It's hard for me to do that because you might have a severely overweight person who like I said, 5 push-ups might be awesome for him. And I don't know if there's really a standard. It also, again, depends on your background and stuff like that. So it'd be awesome for everyone to be able to do 10 pull-ups or 50 push-ups and stuff like that. But guys, we all know it's not always how it goes. So, all right, does anyone have any more questions? Because we are dead on questions right now, and it's almost done here. So we got about 4 more minutes here. So if anyone has any questions they want cleared up before the end of the hour, please do so. Before we go, again, I'd like to thank everyone for showing up. I'd like to thank everyone who asked questions, anyone who watches this either now or later on YouTube. So we are starting to do some YouTube shorts that will take little clips of these answers and put them out there. So all right, so here we go, and I'll try to put those on Instagram too, so we have shorter videos that you guys can stomach, because I know this is an hour. It's hard to sit through these. I don't really, with long form interviews, I like to watch them in pockets. I can't sit around. I don't have time for sitting around listening to so-and-so get interviewed for 2 hours. So, all right. So Ian, go ahead. Blast away, buddy. He says in the chat, he says he is late and he does have a question. So go ahead and get that to me. I'll take a sip of my agua. I'm excited because right after this, I'm going to go train. And it's been beautiful here. So it's not too hot, obviously, and it's not 30 below. Okay. Ian says, hey, when I deadlift, the small of my back is very tight and sore. And I am my best just focusing on good mornings and straight leg deadlifts and back raises, etc., for supplemental work. So I'm going to guess that for whatever reason, deadlifts hurt your back, and he just wants to focus on good morning, straight leg deadlifts, back raises, etc., for supplemental work. Yeah, I don't think there's any issue with that. Obviously you'd like to figure out what is wrong with your back. So you might play around a little bit. Maybe instead of deadlifting, you might be able to do the trap bar, or you might be able to do a rack pull from a certain position. That might help you out quite a bit. But if all those things kind of take a crap on you, and maybe you need to get your back looked at also, obviously, right, by some kind of professional, and so that doesn't become a long-term problem. But as long as you listen, guys, as long as you've got some kind of lower body movement that you can load and get strong on, it doesn't matter if it's a squat, it's a deadlift, a trap bar, doesn't matter, maybe it's a prowler push. All right, whatever you do, you got to have one of those. Okay, you got to have some kind of loaded pushing movement. Again, it might be push-ups, dips, bench press, overhead press, incline. I don't care what it is. And then some kind of strength movement for pulling. That could be obviously pull-ups, chin-ups, rows, anything like that. As long as you have one of those for each movement, and that doesn't mean that's all you do, guys, but that's like your focus for the strength, you're going to be okay. That's super important, okay? So 3 things: something for your lower body, something for your upper body push, and something for your upper body pull. As an example, One of my friends, his main things are overhead press, the trap bar, and he does weighted pull-ups. So that's how he tests. Doesn't mean he does weighted pull-ups all the time, but those are his main movements. Another one of my friends does, again, the trap bar, does dumbbell rows as his kind of like his big strength movement for his pulling. And he does bench press. So it doesn't mean he doesn't ever do chin-ups, but he doesn't focus on bringing those up. And it doesn't mean you're tied to those movements, but as long as you got some of that, guys, just because, for example, you can't deadlift or you can't squat doesn't mean it's the end of the world, okay? I can't emphasize how important it is, guys, to take a massive long-term approach to that stuff, okay? So Lonnie says, hey, what can I do to boost my immune system? I've been sick 3 times since the end of December, and I'm tired of being sick. Lonnie, good to see you, buddy. The big thing, and I'm not an expert on this, so, but I do a fairly good job of not being sick. And so here's the things. Is number one, you got to get quality sleep. If you could somehow bottle the effects of quality sleep, you'd be a billionaire. I got that from my good friend. One of my good friends were talking about that on the forum. But that is number one. Number two is you can't train yourself into the ground. I know, Lonnie, you like to do a ton of work, but sometimes, as good as training is for your body, it can also have a detrimental effect on your body. So a lot of times you can't just run your body down and expect your immune system to get stronger when it's always run down. So again, you may have to cut back a little bit on your training. It might be volume. That's usually the culprit. Number three is, and this is just my personal thing, the better conditioning I feel, like if I'm doing a lot of good conditioning work, and that's both long or easy conditioning and hard conditioning, I think that does a really good thing. The other thing, obviously, would be what you consume, your diet. Doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but when I have a high protein with quality fats in my diet and I'm not eating sugar, that's a big thing. And it doesn't mean you can't have any carbs, but as long as you're trying to keep that to a minimum, I think you're going to be very good to go. And a lot of this stuff, man, especially, Lon, I know you're a little bit older, it's tough to do because I know you like to drive that nail into the ground, so to speak, all the time. So a lot of this is going to be a blow to your ego, but those few things I think can make a big difference, huge difference. As far as supplementation, I'm not an expert in any of that stuff. So as long as you have a fairly well-rounded diet and maybe you take a multivitamin or mineral. The other, I should probably point this out. The one as far as supplementation, the one supplement that I always take and it seems to help quite a bit is ZMA at night. I just get it's very inexpensive, a ZMA formula. It helps improve your sleep, at least it does mine. And zinc and magnesium, especially magnesium, is very, most people suffer from low magnesium, and I think that helps quite a bit. But again, make sure you're sleeping well, make sure you're not training yourself into the ground, and make sure you're eating fairly healthy. Those three things, I think, will make a huge difference, and don't be afraid to getting to cut back on some of the heavier weightlifting stuff a little bit and just see how your body reacts, okay? Eagle Training says, hey, Jim, could you please talk about how you'd set up assistance templates for the 5-3-1 pillow pin where the focus is on quality and fast reps in the main lifts and really pushing the assistance? Depends on the person, obviously, but I would probably, if I was doing that, I would probably have probably 3 or 4 assistance lifts, probably done kind of like metabolic conditioning style. So you do a set every 90 seconds on a running clock. I'd probably pick a full body style. So you would do something push, something pull, something for your lower body, and I'd also do something for your abdominals and core. So I'd have four of those movements and probably do 3 to 4 sets, probably 3 sets of each. And again, it'd be big circuit, so set everything else up, and I think that would do very good. The other thing you have to understand is if you're advanced, And I think the other thing you have to understand is because you're using that style of train, I really think it would be important that means that if you're just enjoy training and kind of going bonkers. And you know, I love something to lose the ability. It's something you need, especially see it when the kids over the years, they start to learn how to push and push and push. And by the time they're seniors, it may take 4 or 5 years, they're able to push through a set, or they're able to push through a prowler work. And that it's it's always the 2 days. Saturday always feels bad. And then Sunday feels even worse. 2 days after always sucks. Anyway, we're going to get going here, Peter. I try to do my best. Anyway, have a, and you know, don't be a regular person. All right. Be something better. Anyway, I love all you guys for showing up. Thank you for contributing and being part of this. I love doing these things. Anyway, I'm going to go train right now. I'm not going to do anything dumb today, but at least I plan not to, but we will see. Anyway, you guys have a great day. Love you. Have a great weekend.